bias, I'm going to talk about bias. Bias is an error in judgment that's conscious or unconscious. It results in an unfair treatment against or in favor of somebody. So when you're trying to make as a human an objective decision and a rating on somebody, there's always a bias that comes in. It's if you have a brain, you have a bias. Now, these are just some of the biases, okay, that come in. So the first one is recency bias, okay, and then we have a whole bunch of different biases here. So we're going to go through those. We have a recency bias is things that actually have happened right now, like sooner, are the ones that are going to actually you're going to focus on those more than the ones that actually happened a year ago. So whatever happened, if somebody got in trouble, if somebody didn't do their job, if somebody did do their job. Now, recency bias is something that you can't get out of your head. If it happened now and it was impactful to the business in a positive or negative way, it's hard to actually let that go. You really remember that. Okay. The brain does that. So in order to prevent this, I'm going to give you some solutions as we go. If I treated you like a jerk, think about it. And when we first met, and then tomorrow I buy you a coffee the next day to make up for it, you're going to think that my gesture is some sort of manipulation tactic, and you're going to just think that I'm a jerk and that you can't buy me off. Okay. However, if I make a great first impression when we first meet and I buy you a coffee the next day, you're likely to see the act of goodwill and think, wow, Michelle's really a nice person. So this is an example of this. So how you're going to get around this is if you have a dossier of performance snapshots, it helps you overcome this. So having somebody like with yourself of different things that you've done throughout the year, and you actually put like a title on it, and then you write your emotions, how you felt about it. The emotions is important, what you did and the outcome that you got and how it impacted the business. So if you do that for yourself when you're going into a review, and also the reviewer does that for their direct reports, it helps you prevent this primacy, this type of bias, this recency bias. Okay. And so you just need to have a dossier of performance snapshots. And the emotion is important because the emotion elicits a different neuron in our brain to make sure that you're actually embodying that again. And you remember the impact of it. If you do it without emotion, it's just going to be a list, more of a transactional list, and you won't remember the emotion or how much it impacted the actual company and the people around you. So the emotion part is important, how people thought about it and how you thought about it. Okay. Now there's another one. There's a bunch of these biases. Okay. So preventing like centrality bias. Okay. So you want it. So this next one, centrality bias. Okay. If something is central to something, okay, what I want to show you on this one, if you can see this one, is if it's the center part of what you're actually looking at. Okay. If there's between a 1 and a 5, if people are going to rate people between a 1 and a 5, a lot of bosses just want to rate people right in the middle so that they're not actually taking a stand, and they don't want to have you be above or below because they try not to hurt feelings. Now, what you can do as an organization is you can try to make that scale from a 1 to 4. So managers really have to take a stand. People want the direct reports. If you're the manager and you're giving a performance review, people want you to take a stand because they need to know if they're working really hard, that they want to see that, and they want other people to not get that if they didn't work hard. So it's in equity. It's like a fairness thing. So in order to prevent this type of bias, centrality bias, is you want to actually make your scale. If you're going to make a scale, you're going to make it 1 to 4 so that somebody can't not take a stand and have somebody be right in the middle. Okay. Now, leniency bias. Okay. This one is interesting, leniency bias. And so I would know that a lot of people can do this. It's giving a facade. Okay. There's almost like a facade of somebody being lenient on somebody, even though there's room for improvement. You're being lenient on them. You're leaving them feeling that they are doing good, even though you're being lenient, but you're not telling them that there's room for improvement because you might not want to be able to take a stand. It leaves other people disengaged, disappointed, defeated on the team. If one person is getting a leniency and other people are not. So this really disengages other people on the team. So Others notice this, and they actually, a lot of times this leads to people leaving, a retention issue. So this includes how people talk and think about their team members. So when you're talking and you're hearing what people are saying about different teams, I want you to understand everybody's listening to everything that you're saying if you're a boss. And even if you're on the team, everybody is listening to everything, and it's allowing that to actually come into play. So people are constantly rating where they stand. It's hard for the human brain not to put yourself in some type of ranking position on your team. And when there's a leniency for one person, it's very much noticed and the other people are disgruntled. And I talk to a lot of these people in coaching of what to do. Okay. Now there's a similar to me bias, okay, an in or an out group. This really creeps in. I want you to pay attention to this one. That's why I made it this other color, this teal color. This really creeps into remote work. Okay. When you give preferential treatment to those people who are near you, okay, or who are in your group. So they could be people who come into the office that you see more often. It could be people who stayed in state and other people moved away. It could be people that are like you for some reason. Okay. All of these things are the in group, okay, or the similar to me bias. So there's an in group and an out group. And annually, people score 20% lower. They get a 20% less raise. They get a 20% less rating if they're across the state line, if they're being hybrid. This affects women a lot because women have a lot of the role with children at home. And so they stay home and they want to do that because it's easier. And men would more likely come in, at least what the research shows, come into the office. So there's an in group and an out group. There's different areas that this affects. It affects horizontal promotions, new opportunities, new skill development opportunities, even prioritizing different tasks, who does what and who doesn't do what, who gets noticed and who doesn't get noticed. So this has a lot to do with an in group and an out group. And people are constantly assessing this behind the scenes just by the little things that you say, the little things that you do. Okay. And so in order to prevent this, it's what we want to do is we want to get to know each other. So in meetings, whether they're on Zoom or not, okay, we want to ask questions. The more you get to know everybody, the less this happens. This is what the science is behind it. So you can actually pose questions, dog or cat, what's on your bucket list this year? You're trying to create memorable moments that everybody can share so everybody feels like they're in the in group. This has led to a 14% decrease in that in group, out group moments. Okay. Employees will get a 17% higher perception of other people when you actually ask questions like this in meetings. And they're simple questions, but when people ask them and they make more memorable moments with everybody in the group, it creates a higher performing team and it creates more equity across the team as well. So there's not so much the in group and the out group. And these are things that we really need to look at, especially with hybrid work. Okay. There's an experience bias. So this is over evaluating tasks that are easy to define. So now this one's really important as well. So people focus energy in different areas. So men and women really focus energy in different areas. So men choose to work, like to do work. And it seems like research shows that men will do work that on things that are more visible external tasks. You'll find women doing things that are sometimes more invisible, and they're less visible, like to boost team cohesion and to help psychological safety, to help the reorganization of the teams. Those things are not as visible and they're not as easy to evaluate. If somebody gives a speech at a conference or they do an interview and that directly impacts the business, that's going to be something that's visible, that has an energy to it, and it's easy to evaluate. So this experience bias is how many tasks are you doing that are easy to evaluate and how many tasks are you doing that are not as easy to evaluate and a little bit less. It's hard to understand how psychological safety plays into the bottom line, although it does, but it's harder to evaluate these types of things. So men will rate 12% higher than women because of this bias, because they're choosing experiences, they're choosing to do different things that are putting them in a visible area, and those things have direct impact and they're easier to evaluate. Okay. To reverse this, what I want you to do is ask yourself what you can track that you do each week. Like create a virtual whiteboard that your boss or your peers can look at, and in there, right on there, the things that you're actually doing. Right on there, if it's ambitious, if it's an internal task, an external task, the length of time it took to do it, the level of difficulty it took. So all these things will start to balance this out, because when you put this every week in there, what you're working on, you'll be able to see one person did this, but it was a lot less level of difficulty. This is a longer term project, and they'll be able to rate them more easily. So in order to reverse this experience bias, you want to keep track on a whiteboard that everybody can see what you're doing, assess how ambitious it is, the time frame for it, and the level of difficulty, keeping track of these, even putting in your small milestones that you're getting and good things that happen, also setbacks, okay, so that it actually can show your timeline. The last one for biases is preventing like a proximity bias. This is a tendency to think people in your orbit do the most work, okay? Hybrid work exacerbates this. So it penalizes people who stay home, like maybe women, and it gives men, if men are going into the office, whoever's going into the office, it gives them the benefit of the doubt because they're in that same proximity. Okay. So there's this proximity bias. And so this is another one that we want to try to be aware of as we're doing performance reviews. So these are all very, very important, and it's very difficult to just get rid of all these. So I've given you a couple ways to reverse these that are science-based.